Hi, folks. Welcome to what I'm sure will be a very awkward run through of reading a rhetorical analysis prompt. For some reason, I'm like really nervous to record myself, but I'm going to go through it anyway. This is a rhetorical analysis prompt from 2015. I'm not going to write an essay or identify what my main points would be. I just want to give you a sense of like how you should be reading this. I think we need a refresher just because it's been so long since we've done rhetorical analysis. So I'm going to start with a prompt. So on the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., labor union organizer and civil rights leader Cesar Chavez published an article in the magazine of a religious organization devoted to helping those in need. That's a mega sentence. Read the following excerpt from the article carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze the rhetorical choices Chavez makes to develop his argument about nonviolent resistance. So we know right away that the first thing that we're going to do is analyze the rhetorical choices and whatever his argument is about the nonviolent resistance. So if we go back 100 years and think about the concrete and the abstract part of it, this is our concrete and this is our abstract. This is the part that's up for interpretation, right? Like we'll be able to find the same rhetorical devices, but whatever his argument is about nonviolent resistance, that's where we have our own interpretations. I also wanted to point out that on the 10th anniversary of the assassination of MLK, that's 1978. I had to look it up. I knew that he was assassinated in the 60s. I just wasn't sure, but it's 68. So maybe that'll help us contextualize some things as well. There's also a hint in the prompt as to who our audience is. We know that this is an article in the magazine of a religious organization devoting to helping those in need. So it's a service-based religious audience. So now that we know those things, I'm just going to go through and annotate this text. I will probably find things that either you found or maybe you found something that I didn't find, and that's totally okay. I just wanted to give you kind of the sense of what I was looking at. The first thing I noticed is Dr. King's entire life. When I see the word entire, that makes me obviously think that it's a pretty big chunk of it. So using that word tells us that it's very important to Dr. King. As we keep reading, I noticed lots of us's and ours and we's. I'm not going to go through and circle them all, but just skimming, I see tons and tons of them. So I have an idea that at some point I'll be able to talk about how Cesar Chavez includes himself in the argument, which makes him a more relatable person to listen to, right? So that's like an appeal to ethos. Okay. Dr. King's entire life was an example of power that nonviolence brings to bear in the real world. It is an example that inspired much of the philosophy and strategy of the farm workers movement. This observance of Dr. King's death gives us the best possible opportunity to recall the principles with which our struggle has grown and matured. When I say recall the principles which our struggle has grown and matured, that's like taking it back to the roots. Now that's not a rhetorical device, but that just kind of gives us a sense of what this whole article is going to be grounded about. It's going back to the principles that started this movement of the labor union organizer and the civil rights, right? There's an allusion to God in the second paragraph. And that's pretty much it for the first part. As we continue reading, we see nonviolence supports, nonviolence provides. The words supports and provides both have positive connotations. So when I see that, I know that no matter what, like obviously we know that he's talking about nonviolence and the values of it, but having those positive connotative words next to nonviolence will really reinforce the fact that that is the best choice, almost subconsciously. Instead of saying nonviolence is present or nonviolence is there, like that doesn't really have a connotation. Those words do. I'm going to skip down to line 20-ish. Let's see here. If we resort to violence, then one of two things will happen. Whenever we see that, we can almost guarantee that that's going to be a false choice. False choice is a fallacy. We don't necessarily know that only those two things are possibilities, but Chavez is presenting it as though they are. I'm going to skip down to like 27-ish. We are convinced that when people are faced with a direct appeal from the poor struggling nonviolently against the odds, they will react positively. That to me is like radiating a tone of confidence. He's being very direct there and enforcing that tone. It is to that yearning that we appeal, because the American people and people everywhere still yearn for justice. This, I'm going to use a highlighter so I don't ruin it. This kind of goes back to here for me, because we're talking about the struggle, how it's grown and matured, and that is something that we're still appealing for. If everybody wants justice, he's like, hey, you want justice, so do we. So we're both yearning for justice. I know this is kind of messy, but this is just how my brain works. Okay, so skipping down here, so we work on the theory that men and women who are truly concerned about people are nonviolent by nature. These people become violent when deep concern they have for people is frustrated when they are faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. First of all, I'm going to highlight this part, seemingly insurmountable odds, because seemingly tells us that there is a way that we'll be able to surmount these difficulties, right? We'll be able to get over it. But this whole part here where he talks about we work on the theory, this is like an appeal to logic to me. Because not only is he talking about a theory, but he's talking about the way that this is a bold claim. Like, this is how people will react, and that's the way that things have worked before. So having that clear sense of logic is also a way that he builds his argument. I'm continuing on down here. We are not blind to the feelings of frustration, impatience, and anger which seethe inside of every farm worker. He's admitting that there are frustrations, impatience, and anger. And he says, like, I hear you. Right? He's not just saying, like, oh, we're going to get through this together because everybody's in such a great mood about it. He's like, no, I understand that there's frustration and anger that you're dealing with. So let's figure out how to get through that. Shortcut to change. Metaphor. Let's see here. As I continue on, freedom, his best experience through this part here. I'm going to read this sentence. Freedom is best experienced through participation and self-determination, and free men and women instinctively prefer democratic change to any other means. That's kind of a bold claim too. So when I had that confidence tone over here, this is another strong claim that Chavez is making. So I think that helps with the tone as well. Mentions Gandhi. It's an allusion to Gandhi and his teachings. I like this sentence. When victory comes through violence, it is a victory with strings attached. I like that because it's kind of a metaphor, right? Because there aren't literally strings attached. But then we have this victory and violence and victory with strings attached. So that repetition there, victory, violence, victory, is something for us to point out as well. I'm going to skip down to the bottom here. Let's see. Just kidding, not totally the bottom. We have use of you here. That might be something for us to look at later. There's a direct demand, examine history. We all know that this is a rhetorical question. And those who espouse violence exploit people. That just sounds like a little catchy thing, doesn't it? If I continue to the very last sentence, we learned many years ago that the rich have money, but the poor have time. Now that, to me, sounds like a paradox, because it doesn't totally make sense. And how do you put money and time in the same category? Well, Chavez would probably argue that this having time thing is a good thing. So basically what I did is I made a mess of this whole piece of paper, and I'm not pretending that I found everything. These are just the things that jumped out at me when I read it through the first time. Remember that whenever you are writing a rhetorical analysis, you absolutely have to answer both parts of this this question here, you're looking for the concrete and the abstract. Again, I'm not going to go through what an essay would look like, but hopefully this helps you as you continue your studies preparing for your AP exam.